Please, just look." Those were the only words she had left. They came out of her in a cracked whisper, no louder than wind moving over dry grass, and Elias Ward almost rode past without hearing them at all. He had been 3 days without seeing another living soul. The Utah desert did that to a man in August. It burned the color out of the sky by mid-morning and laid the land flat and white to the mountains. Salt and sage and nothing. The kind of country that set a rider to talking to his horse just to hear a human voice. So when he came over the lip of a dry wash and saw the shape of her slumped against a broken wagon wheel, he took her for a trick of the heat. A shadow, a dead thing the buzzards had not yet found. Then the shape lifted its head, and he saw a woman. She was young under the dirt. That was the first thing. The grime and the bruises put 10 hard years on her, but the eyes that found his were a girl's eyes, gray as creek ice, and they fixed on him with a want so plain it stopped him in the saddle. She was wrapped to the throat in a wool blanket gone the color of the ground. Her feet were bare and split at the heel. A length of thin wire hung around her neck like a necklace no one had thought to take off, and where it sat the skin was worn to a raw shine. "Water," Elias said. It came out rough. He had not used the word aloud in a while either. He swung down, uncorked what was left in his canteen, and knelt. She drank in small swallows, all she could manage, and her hand came up and closed on his wrist. Not to stop him, to hold on. "Easy now," he said. "You are all right." She was not all right, and they both knew it, and she shook her head at the lie of it. Her mouth worked. When the sound came, it was that same ruined whisper, and it plainly cost her something to make it. "Please, just look." Look at what? Her free hand went to the blanket at her collarbone and pulled it down. Elias had spent his life around branded stock. He knew the running iron and the road brands, the marks a man burned into a hide to say this is mine and no other man's. So his mind reached first for the nearest thing it knew, and the nearest thing it knew was ownership. Her chest was covered in marks. Not one brand. Hundreds. They ran from the hollow of her throat down under the blanket, small and dark and deliberate, rows of them, columns of them, shapes he had no name for, little forked lines, wedges, something like the tally a man keeps on a fence post, 4 staves and a slash, over and over, on, more than he could take in at a glance. Then she moved his hand with hers, pressed 2 of his fingers flat to a mark just below her throat, and dragged them slow across the skin, left to right, the way a man's eye travels down a page, and Elias understood that he was not looking at a brand at all. He was looking at writing, not letters, not any alphabet he had been taught, but writing all the same, made by someone with a purpose, laid down in an order, meant to be read. Her finger tapped one small shape, then a line of the tally beside it, tapped it again, harder, and her ruined voice pushed out a single word he finally caught. "Count. You want me to count them?" "Yes." Her eyes closed a moment. "Yes." He looked back down at the marks, and something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the coming night, because now that he saw it as a page, he could not stop seeing it. The forked lines along the top were not decoration. They were a shape he half knew. 2 peaks with a notch between them, the way you would draw a mountain a man could steer by. Below it, a wavering line, and a small round mark where the line bent. Water. A spring, maybe, at a bend in a wash. And below that the columns began, the endless staves and slashes, and he did not want to count them, because some animal part of him already knew the number would be a bad one. "Who did this to you?" She shook her head. It was not the answer. He had asked the wrong thing, and she did not have the breath to correct a fool. Her fingers fumbled at the hem of the blanket, where the wool had been rolled and stitched, and worked something loose from inside the fold. She held it up between them in the last of the light. A needle. A common sewing needle. Steel. The eye of it dark with something worked into the metal. She turned it so he could see the point, then touched the point to her own skin, to the marks, and touched it back to herself, and looked at him, and waited for him to say it. He did not want to say it. "You did this," Elias said. "You made these. On your own self." She let out a breath that might have been the ghost of relief. Then she nodded. Once. And her eyes filled and spilled and cut 2 clean tracks down through the dirt on her face, and she did not make a sound while she wept, not one, and that silence told him more than any scream could have. She had learned to cry without noise. Somewhere, for a long time, it had not been safe to be heard. Elias Ward had come into that desert looking for one person, A girl of his own, gone a year now into this same white country, and never come out the far side of it. He had told himself 100 stories about where she might be. Not one of them had looked like this. He took off his coat and set it around the woman's shoulders, over the blanket, and he did not ask her another question she would have to bleed to answer. The sun went down behind the salt. The wire glinted at her throat. He would learn her name was Junia 3 nights later, and only because she scratched it in the dust with that same needle, 4 letters, and pointed to herself. But that first evening he had no name for her. He had only the marks, and the count she wanted, and the slow dawning knowledge that she had turned her own body into a page, because somewhere in her ruin she had decided a thing and held to it harder than most men hold to anything. He got her up behind the cantle, which took a while, because she could not grip with her hands the way a body should, and he had to lift most of her weight himself, and the old bay stood patient through it the way Job always did. He walked the horse rather than rode, leading them off the flat toward a spine of red rock a mile east, where there would be shade come morning and a wall at their backs come dark. The desert cooled fast once the sun was gone. By the time he had her down and settled against the rock, she had stopped shivering only because there was nothing left in her to shiver with. He did not risk a fire. A fire could be seen 20 miles off in that country, and he did not yet know who might be looking. He gave her the last of the jerked beef, softened in water, and she ate like a person who had taught herself not to hope for more. He watched her hands. The fingers had been hurt and healed crooked, more than once, and still she had threaded a needle in the dark with them, and written a book on her own skin, and he could not fathom the wanting that took. "I am looking for somebody," he said, low, into the dark between them. He had not meant to. It came out on its own. "My sister, Naomi. She went west last fall with a wagon party out of Fort Bridger, making for California before the passes closed. They took a cutoff across the salt to save the season, a shortcut somebody swore by. Wrote me every stop. Then the letters quit. The last one came from a place she called the Halfway Spring. Said they had found good water there, and a kind family that took travelers in." He stopped. His own voice had gone strange to him. "That was 10 months back. I have been riding this desert since the thaw." He did not know why he told her. Maybe because she could not tell it back to anyone. Maybe because in all that empty country she was the only ear. But something happened when he said it. Junia had gone still. In the starlight he saw her eyes come open and turn to him, then down to her own chest, to the marks, and her hand rose and hovered there as if she meant to point to something and did not dare. Her mouth shaped a word with no sound in it. Then she shook her head hard, the way you shake off a thought that has teeth, and pulled his coat tighter, and would not look at him again. He told himself it was nothing. A hurt woman, frightened of everything, startled by a name. He should have known better. He had spent the whole evening learning that the marks on her never meant nothing. She slept at last, sitting up against the rock with the needle closed in her fist where he could not have taken it had he tried. Elias did not sleep. He sat with his rifle across his knees and watched the flat go silver under the moon, all that dead white ground running out to the mountains. And somewhere under it, he was beginning to think, more graves than any preacher had ever counted. He looked at the small dark shape of her, at her closed hand. Whatever was written on that woman, his sister's name was in it. He did not know that yet, not for certain. But the country had gone quiet in a way that felt like waiting, and Elias Ward had the feeling of a man who has picked up one end of a thing and cannot now put it down. The country was still waiting on him when the sun came up, and it went on waiting while Elias Ward learned to read. She taught him as they traveled, at the water holes where they stopped to let the horse blow and to soak the wire burn at her throat. She would smooth a patch of dust flat with her palm, take the needle, and copy a mark out of herself into the ground, slow, so he could set the one against the other. The forked shape with 2 peaks and a notch was a mountain, a real one, with a false pass that looked like a way through and was not. The wavering line was a wash that ran only after rain. The round mark at the bend was the spring. She was drawing him a map, and had been drawing it the better part of a year, one needle prick at a time, in the only place it could not be taken from her and burned. "How far?" he asked, and she held up fingers and folded them, and he understood it was days, not many of them, and that they lay to the west, back the way she had crawled. He had been steering them east, toward the nearest town he knew, a place with a doctor and a bed and 4 walls. She let him, at first. She had not yet decided he had earned the truth. It was the columns that came to sit on him. They filled the whole of her chest below the map, and once he had the trick of it, he could not lose it. The tally marks were people. 4 staves and a slash, 4 and a slash, wagon after wagon, and beside a good many of them a smaller sign, a private mark she had made for the ones whose faces she would not let herself forget, a bonnet, a pair of boots drawn heel to heel, a ring. She had given the vanished the only monument the desert allowed, and she had carried it out on her back. She could not have told a marshal any of this. A voiceless woman with a wild story and no proof would be handed to a doctor, not a judge. So she had made the proof the one way left to her. You cannot make a person believe you. She had learned that down to the bone. You can only make them into something they cannot look away from. And the marks were not all in one column. He noticed it on the second morning. Most of them ran down the left of her, packed tight, a crowd. But a small handful sat apart on the right, set off by a line she had scored deeper than all the rest. He touched them and looked the question at her, and her face did a thing he would not forget. She laid her hand flat over the crowded left and bowed her head. Then she laid 2 fingers, gently, on the few at the right, and lifted her eyes to the mountains in the west, toward the spring. Gone, the left hand said. Still there, said the right. The kept. He sat with that a while. The living were the shorter list. That was the arithmetic of the place she had come out of. It was then, because he had told her about Naomi, and because she had at last decided he had earned it, that Junia reached up and moved his hand herself, past the crowd, past the deep-scored line, to a mark set high on her collarbone, where the skin was thin and the drawing had healed clean. A small thing. A bird, wings out, throat lifted. A lark. Elias forgot to breathe for a moment. He had a sudden clear picture of a girl of 9 on a split-rail fence behind their mother's house in Missouri, singing to the meadowlarks until they answered her, swearing up and down that they knew her, that they were singing back. Naomi and her larks. She had carried that all her life. She would have hummed on a wagon bench across 1,000 miles of nothing. She would have sung at a kind family's spring while they smiled and waited. That is her, he said. His voice had gone to almost nothing. That is my sister. You are telling me she was there. Junia nodded, and here was the cruelty of hope. She nodded, and his eyes went to the little lark sitting high and clean above the crowd, and his heart, braced a year to hear the worst, seized instead on the best thing it could find. Set apart, he told himself, high and clean, and not down in the packed dead column. Among the kept, surely. Alive. He did not ask which side of the deep-scored line the lark was on. He was a man who had ridden a whole desert on the strength of not asking. And Junia, who could have told him with a single tap of one ruined finger, looked at his face in the moment it filled with light, and could not do it. She had made herself into a record that did not lie. But she was still only a person, and she let him have the night. He turned the horse west the next morning. He did not say much about it. He only pointed the bay toward the 2 peaks and told her, lo, that they were going to the spring, and Junia did not weep and did not shake her head. She reached up and touched the little lark, then touched the deep-scored line, then, deliberately, touched herself, and he took it to mean she would guide him in. He did not let it mean anything else. He risked a fire that evening. They were far enough out, and she was cold to the bone, and it seemed to him a man's sister being alive was worth a little smoke. He built it small in a scrape of rock, and fed it sage that burned quick and clean, and while the light held he did a small thing that surprised them both. He took the blanket where it had torn along the shoulder, and he asked for the needle. She held it a long moment before she gave it over. It was the only thing in the world that was hers. Then she put it in his palm and watched him thread it with a strand from his own shirt and make small, careful stitches along the tear, mending the thing that had covered her. And something in her face let go that had not let go in a year. She did not smile. She had lost the habit. But she watched him sew, and once she made a sound that was not a word, and not weeping either. A small broken breath of a thing. And he looked up and she looked away, and he went on stitching. And that was as near to peace as either of them had come in a long time. He gave the needle back. She closed it in her fist. Days before any of this, far to the east at the spring, Harlan Voss had walked out to the cellar at first light and found the board pried loose and the woman gone. He did not shout. Voss was not a shouting man. He was a lean, courteous fellow of 50 with a preacher's soft voice and clean hands, and he stood over the gap in the cellar wall and considered it the way a shopkeeper considers a broken window. His wife came out behind him, drying her hands on her apron, and made a small distressed sound. She will die out there, Effie said. Barefoot. She will not last 2 days. She has lasted this long. Voss crouched and touched the scored board, the grooves worn into it where the wire had sawed, night after night, for months. 10 months. I told you that one was different. I told you her eyes were wrong. He stood and looked west, where the country ran out empty and pitiless to the salt, and there was no heat in his face, only a kind of tired accounting. The desert takes what it takes, he said. I never made this country hard, Effie. I only keep the door. But a woman who walks out carrying what she has seen, that is a debt the country did not make. That one is mine to settle. He told the hired man to saddle the gray, and the two of them rode out to run her down. They did not find her. The wind came up that afternoon and scoured the country clean, and Voss rode back to the spring to wait. A woman who could not talk could not tell, and the desert would most likely finish what he had begun. He had waited out troublesome things before. That same first morning, while Voss saddled the gray, Effie Voss went back inside and set the table. She did it every morning, 3 plates now instead of 4, and she smoothed the cloth and squared the tin cups and hummed while she worked. A hymn tune, soft. The girl sat where Effie had put her, on the stool by the cold hearth, a thin, fair thing not yet 19, and watched the older woman move about the room with those clean, careful hands. Effie brought her a bowl of mush with a spoon of molasses stirred in, and crouched in front of her the way you would crouch to a child. Eat, Effie said gently. You have gone all to bones. She tucked a strand of the girl's hair back with one finger. You will feel more yourself when you are stronger. The last one filled her head with nonsense. And see what it got her. You are the sensible one. She patted the girl's knee, and went back to her cloth and her hymn. I always did want daughters, she said. To the room, to no one. The Lord saw fit not to give me any. So he sends them down the road to me instead. It is a comfort, if you let it be. The girl looked at the door Voss had gone out of, and at the 3 plates, and she ate, because she had learned that not eating was noticed. And she said nothing, because the last one who had a voice had worn it half away on that wire, rather than leave it in this house, and was gone now out into the desert, and the girl did not yet know if that was escape or only a slower way of dying. Stay with this one to the end. What that woman carried out of the desert deserves to be seen the whole way through. Elias knew none of that, riding west into the country that had swallowed his sister. He knew only that Junia had shown him the way in, and that the 2 peaks stood a little nearer each dusk. The weather turned on the 3rd afternoon of the push. The wind came up out of the south and lifted the salt flat hole, a brown wall of grit that rolled toward them faster than a horse could run. Elias pulled Junia down into the lee of the horse, put his back to the storm, and his hat over both their faces, and the world went to a howling ochre nothing. The sun snuffed out at midday. When it passed, the country had rearranged itself. Dunes where there had been flat. The line he had been steering by rubbed clean away. He did not know where they were. Junia only laid her hand flat on her own chest, on the map, and pointed a little north of the sun. She did not need his trail. She carried the country on her skin, and no wind could scour that clean. He turned the horse the way she pointed, and by evening the 2 peaks stood up out of the haze, exactly where she had promised. He had stopped doubting her some time back. Now he began to be afraid of how much she knew. They crested the long rise at dusk on the 4th day. Below them, small and ordinary in the failing light, sat a homestead at a green seam in the white waste. A cabin, a barn, a pole corral with 12 horses in it, more horses than any one family could need. A wagon with no team, and another beyond it, and another, drawn up in a row along the fence as if they had simply been set down and forgotten. A thread of smoke stood straight up from the chimney in the still evening air, and at the heart of it, where the ground went green, the dark eye of the spring, it looked like nothing at all. It looked like water and rest and a kind family at the end of a hard road. Junia's hand closed on his sleeve, and Elias Ward looked down at the place where all those wagons ended, and understood that his sister had come over this same rise a year before and seen this same soft smoke, and had ridden down toward it glad. Her hand stayed on his sleeve while the smoke stood straight up in the dusk, and for a long while neither of them moved off that rise. They made no fire. They lay in a cut below the ridge where the light of them could not carry down to the spring, and Elias watched the one lit window of the cabin far below, small and yellow and warm, and tried to make his mind hold what his eye kept telling him. All those horses, all those wagons in a row, a family that took travelers in. It was the waiting that undid his hope. A man with nothing to do but wait will in the end look hard at the thing he has been refusing to see. Sometime past moonrise, Elias asked Junia to show him the marks again, and this time he did not go to them like a man reading a promise. He went slow. He found the deep line she had scored down through herself to divide the living from the dead, and he made himself follow it up, to where the little lark sat on her collarbone. The lark was on the left of the line. He had seen it high and clean above the crowd, and told himself it stood apart. It did not stand apart. It stood at the head of the long column, the crowded one, the gone, first among them, highest, but on the dead side of the line she had drawn, and there was no reading it any other way, and some part of him had known it since the first night, and had ridden 4 days deeper into the desert rather than learn it. "When?" he said. Junia's hand shook when she reached for his. She pressed his fingers to the lark, then to the marks closest around it, the freshest, where the skin had barely finished healing, and he understood. Not a year gone, not last fall, weeks. His sister had been alive in that cabin through the whole long winter and the spring and into the summer, alive while he rode the thaw looking for her, and she had passed into the crowded column only weeks before Junia cut the wire and ran. He had missed her by a season. He had been in the same desert the whole time, breathing the same white air. He did not weep. He sat with his sister's whole short life gone quiet in his hands, her and her larks, and he made no sound. And he understood at last where Junia had learned that particular silence, a grief too large to let out all at once, because in that country it would kill you, and there was work yet to do, because there was still the right side of the line, the kept, the short column. He put his fingers on the few marks, set off past the deep score, and looked the question at her, and Junia nodded, and pointed down the ridge at the yellow window, and he knew that behind that soft, warm light, a girl was still alive, who did not have to stay that way for long. His sister was a mark he could not change. But the marks on the right of the line were not marks yet. They were still people, and people could be carried out. He checked the Colt by feel in the dark, and the Winchester, and neither of them slept. And when the sky went from black to the gray that comes before the sun, they went down off the ridge together. They came into the yard at first light with the sun at their backs. The hired man was at the corral, forking hay, and he saw the shape of a stranger walking a horse out of the sunrise, and hailed him easy, the way you hail any traveler. Then he saw the woman walking at the stranger's side, wrapped in a mended gray blanket, the woman who could not be there, the dead barefoot woman come back up out of the desert, and he dropped the fork and clawed for the pistol at his hip. Elias shot him before it cleared leather. The report slammed flat across the salt and came rolling back off the mountains, and every horse in the corral flung up its head at once. The cabin door banged open. Harlan Voss came out onto the step in his shirt sleeves with a coach gun in his clean hands, and he did not run and he did not curse. He took in the dead man by the corral, and the stranger in the yard, and the woman beside him, and his soft preacher's face moved through something that was almost sorrow. Junia did not wait on him. She broke from Elias and ran, not at Voss but at the corral, and she threw up the pole gate with both her ruined hands, and she put herself in behind that press of frightened horses and drove them, and a dozen head of stolen stock came pouring out through the gap in a wall of dust and hooves, straight across the yard, between Elias and the cabin, and the morning went to thunder and grit. Voss brought the coach gun up, and could not find his shot through the churn of horses. Elias could not find him either, and in the middle of it Junia was already gone, low and quick along the wall of the house to the slanted cellar door she knew, to the board she had lifted 100 times in her mind, and she hauled it up and went down into the dark after the girl. The horses cleared. The dust hung gold in the low sun. Voss stood on his step and Elias stood in his yard, and the coach gun and the Colt came level in the same breath, and it was the old arithmetic of that country, and Elias was a hair the quicker. One shot. Voss sat down slow on his own doorstep with the coach gun sliding off his knees, and he looked up at Elias with no anger in him even then, only that tired, sad accounting of a man who had told himself the desert made him do it. "There is nothing here," Voss said. The blood was coming through his shirt and his voice was going, but he said it as though it were the one truth that would outlast him. "You will find no graves. This country does not give them back. You cannot prove a single soul of them. It will be your word, and a madwoman's, against a good Christian house." Something in him almost smiled. "I have kept this door a long time, mister. No man has ever proved a thing against me." "No," Elias said. "The proof already left." Walked right out past your door. Months back. On her own 2 feet. One stitch at a time. In the dark. In the one place you never thought to look. He crouched, so the man would hear the last of it plain. You did not take her voice from her. You only made her write it down where your fire could not reach. And now the whole territory is going to read it off her skin. Voss's face changed then, at the very end, for the first time. The calm of 30 years came apart in it as he understood how he had been beaten, and by whom. By the barefoot woman with the wrong eyes, the one he had told his wife would not last 2 days. He died on his own step with that knowledge on his face, and Elias felt no gladness in it, only a great weariness, and the sun standing full up now over the ruin of the place. Junia came up out of the cellar leading a girl by the hand. The girl came up the cellar steps blinded by the light, clutching Junia's crooked fingers, staring around her at the yard, at the sun, at the dead man on the step, the way a person stares who has half forgotten there is a world with an outside to it. Junia did not let go of her. She walked the girl out into the middle of the yard, away from the house, away from the body, into the clean light, and she held her there while she shook. They found Effie Voss at the table. She sat before 3 set plates in the quiet kitchen with her clean hands folded, and when Elias filled the doorway she looked up at him, and past him at the girl safe in Junia's arms, and her face pinched with a real and bewildered hurt. "You have frightened her," Effie said. "She was just beginning to settle. You people never understand. I gave them a home." She was still saying it, soft, to the plates, when they left her there for the territorial marshal to come and collect. She never once understood that she had done a wrong thing. That was the last horror of that place, and Elias carried it up out of that kitchen, and never afterward set it fully down. They left before noon. They took the freed girl up on one of the recovered horses, turned the rest loose across the flats, and rode east out of the green seam toward the 2 peaks, and days beyond them, a town with a marshal and a courthouse. Elias did not go back to search for his sister in the salt. There was no searching. The desert had her and would keep her, the way it kept them all, and the only thing of Naomi left above the ground rode ahead of him now on another woman's collarbone, a small bird with its throat lifted, singing. They had gone perhaps a mile, when a meadowlark went up out of the sage and sang, the way they do, that long, bright falling run of notes, and Junia stopped her horse. She sat and listened to it with her head tilted, and then she opened her hand and took out the needle, the steel gone dark with a year of soot and blood, and she pushed the mended blanket back off her shoulder and set the point to her own skin, on the right of the deep-scored line, the short side, the living side. She made one new mark there, the first she had added to that column in longer than she could count. Then she looked back at the thin, fair girl on the horse behind her, alive, breathing, going home, and she opened her mouth to say a thing out loud, and her ruined voice cracked and caught, and made almost nothing at all. She stopped. She did not try again, but she smiled, the first time in a year. And out in the sage the lark went on singing, and would not quit, as if it knew her, as if it were singing back. You cannot make a person believe you. Elias Ward had ridden into that desert not knowing it, and he rode back out having learned it the hard way, the way she had learned it, the way the girl on the horse had learned it in a cellar in the dark. You cannot make them believe, but you can make them look, and a thing that has once been truly seen can never go back to being a story that no one told, a grave that no one dug, a name the salt swallowed clean. She spent a year turning herself into the one thing no one could look away from. So do not look away from her now. Sit a while with the names she carried out of that country on her own 2 feet, and if one of them will come to you, say it out loud into the quiet where you are. They waited a long time in the dark to be read.